Okay, hello folks, I'm sorry about that earlier glitch. Can you all hear me, first off? I want to see it in the comments before we carry on. Sorry, excellent. So I just transferred over to a recent computer and it appears it's not set up the exact same way my other one is. So, I am Graham Bettinson, I am the Discovery Programme Officer for the South Devon Rivers. I'm also known as the Bother of Computers, similar to Chris Kolonko, our new Humberside Discovery Programme Officer, known as the Concrete Botherer. So today we're going to have a pre-recorded site tour from him, and then we're going to go into a live Q&A. So, you will need to be signed into YouTube to put questions into the chat for this Q&A. So what I need you guys to do, as you watch this presentation, I want you to stick all your questions in for Chris into this chat, and then we'll have a live Q&A afterwards. Okay, so without further ado, I will transfer you over to the pre-recorded site tour.
Right, hello, my name's Chris and I'm the Team North's resident concrete botherer. Today we are at Auburn Sands in East Yorkshire on this fine sunny Yorkshire summer day. Today we've got an amazingly busy beach. There's a lot of tourists around, a lot of people walking their dogs, but 81 years ago this would have been very, very different. You would be massively unlikely to be able to even access this beach. Following the fall of France, the only thing between Britain and certain invasion was the Channel on the south coast and also the North Sea. And as a result of this perceived invasion threat, defences such as this one, like this really nice pillbox here just behind me, as well as these anti-tank cubes, were constructed en masse across the country to try and defend what was termed the coastal crust. And this was the kind of forward line of anti-invasion defences during the Second World War, which were generally, when we look at these defences, what we first see is things like the pillbox, these massive structures which pretty much stand out really nicely in the landscape. But at the time, 81 years ago, there would have been a lot more going on, especially on this stretch of beach. This beach would have been covered extensively with barbed wire, you know, running above the high water mark. In this area, what's really cool is that we sometimes find remnants of this barbed wire, as well as the screw pickets, which are used to kind of fix the barbed wire into the ground. These come up fairly frequently during our surveys when we're working in this area. But what we don't see is the fact that there was a lot more going on. So there would have been slit trenches. We have got some examples of these trenches which were dug in the ground, which soldiers would climb into and scan their surrounding area to defend it if an invader or an invading force did land. We also don't see as well the supporting forces behind these defences as well. So although we have like this nice pillbox and a couple of pillboxes along this stretch of coast, what we don't see is the remains of the actual troops that would have defended this stretch of coast and would have occupied pillboxes like this one. So by August 1940, this stretch of coast was defended by what was termed the 218th Independent Infantry Brigade. And this consisted of a number of divisions, a number of battalions of men who were placed on the coast and inland to defend this vulnerable stretch of coast. So at the time in 1940, around August 1940, this stretch of coast would have been within the Bridlington sector, the 218 Brigade, and the battalion defending here were responsible for defending all the way from Flamborough over there, all the way along the stretch of coast, down to Barmston, which is just a bit further down the coast here. So that's quite a long stretch of beach to be responsible for, but there were about 800 to 1,000 soldiers responsible for this forward defence. So we've got this amazing pillbox just here. It's another Vickers machine gun pillbox, and we've got a whole range of other things going on here as well. So let's have a quick look. So we're just walking through the original path of an anti-tank wall, which is a massive wall built of concrete, which was designed to stop tanks. And, you know, we've got a scatter of this really nasty 1940s concrete going on here. But when we have a closer look at it, we see this metal thing here. So this is the remains of something called Admiralty Scaffolding, or Z1 scaffolding. And this was a scaffolding obstacle that was originally designed to halt the movement of landing craft It turned out when it was tested, it wasn't very effective at that, but it did produce a really decent anti-tank obstacle. So this stuff was deployed from December 1940 onwards. And on this stretch of coast, we see Z1 being erected all the way from Spurn Point, all the way up to the north end of Scarborough in the period from February 1941. And surprisingly, you know, at the end of the war, this stuff was scrapped, or supposedly scrapped, but we still find a lot of it eroding out of the beach today. So looking over towards this pillbox, which we call Earwig Villa, because there's a nice bit of graffiti on it, calling it Earwig Villa. And we can see that it's at a bit of a jaunty angle. It wouldn't have been constructed at that angle during the Second World War. So over the past 81 years, we've seen considerable erosion of this boulder clay cliff here, which makes up much of the Holderness coast. So this stuff erodes at about 1 metre, 2 metres a year. And this is why coastal erosion is having an adverse effect on the defences on this stretch of coast. And you can see over time, you know, this pillbox has started to slump. Originally, it would have been obviously horizontal, pretty much in line with the top of that buttress, which ties it into the anti-tank wall. And over time, you know, it'll eventually, hopefully, level out and flatten out on the beach. But originally, it would have been in a slightly elevated position overlooking the anti-tank wall and the beach itself. So let's head down this way and we'll have a closer look at this anti-tank wall. So when we have a look at this in a bit more detail, again, we can see it's this really nasty, horrible concrete mix that we see common in 1940. But when we start to get here, we can see, you know, we're seeing this thing to pretty much its original height as it was during the Second World War. Again, really tall, the idea being that this is a nice substantial obstacle which would have impeded the movement of enemy vehicles and would have defended the base of this cliff here. So although this cliff itself would have offered a pretty decent obstacle to an enemy vehicle, the defenders themselves decided to put in this anti-tank wall to further strengthen that as a natural defence. When we look at the fabric of this, we can see these vertical lines, and this is the imprints of the wooden shuttering that was used to create a mould into which this was poured. Looking down here, we see some really cool stuff. So you've got the some original wood actually surviving in place. In fact, we've got some original wooden shuttering there surviving within the fabric of the concrete. So obviously when they were casting these things, you know, this wood didn't need to be removed necessarily because, you know, it served its purpose, though they would try and reuse as much of this wooden shuttering as possible. Within this anti-tank wall as well, we sometimes see wooden stakes, which are embedded in this. And we're fairly certain that these wooden stakes indicate the line of the anti-tank wall, or the line the wall was meant to take. And this would have been pegged out on the beach and marked out with tape or string. And the engineers would have come in later and constructed the obstacle, in this case an anti-tank wall, around those pegs. Okay, right, let's have a look at this side of Earwig Villa. So we've already looked at these pillboxes before, and we know that they would have housed a Vickers medium machine gun. When we have a look at the embrasure, which is this hole in the wall, also known as a loophole, through which the gun would have fired, we can see some really cool stuff going on. So we have some indicators of how this embrasure was constructed and how the pillbox itself was constructed. Mainly that we can see these horizontal lines running across the pillbox's front, which are the imprints left by the wooden shuttering that was used to build the pillbox itself. So shuttering is like a big mould made out of wooden planks, and then into that you pour your concrete. Sometimes we find pillboxes built with a facing and an internal facing of brick, which is used again as a shuttering. And a lot of people assume that the pillbox is built from brick, when in reality they had a reinforced concrete core. So looking at this embrasure, we can see that we've got these kind of wooden blocks, which are still inset into the stepped embrasure. And this is where the wooden box would have fit through the shuttering to create this embrasure. So when they cast the pillbox and start to take the shuttering away, they would remove this like box work, and that would leave the finished embrasure. Embrasures were stepped so that if any incoming rounds struck the sides, they wouldn't get channeled into the pillbox. So sometimes you find embrasures which are flat-sided, and that quickly funneled incoming projectiles, splinters and shrapnel into the pillbox itself. We also noticed this rather large buttress below the embrasure, and this is actually hollow on the inside. So this would have allowed originally the forward legs of the Vickers machine gun bipod, or tripod even, to fit in there, and that would have given a wider arc of fire from this embrasure. So the muzzle of the gun would have been pretty much in line with this outer surface of the pillbox. On the back edge, back to the anti-tank wall again, which is made from this horrible concrete, which I really don't like, we can see these curly bits of metal, which are actually screw pickets. So I mentioned earlier that these were driven into the ground, screwed into the ground and used for holding barbed wire. In this case, they've actually been used as a form of reinforcement for the anti-tank wall, which is really quite cool and something you don't see very often, but is a nice feature. So coming around to this side of the pillbox, let's have a look here. This is one of a pair of entrances which sits, oddly enough, facing towards the expected avenue of enemy approach. So there's one on this side, another one on the inside, on the other side, and then inside, it's pretty much an empty structure. But yeah, this projects forward, again, towards the expected avenue of enemy approach. And there's been some debate whether this was a deliberate design flaw to try and keep the crew inside when they were under fire so that they didn't abandon the position or try to fall back. We simply don't know. It's purely conjecture, and we probably won't know the answer until we find a document that supports that. Interestingly enough, there was some variants on, or some modified versions of this pillbox employed up at Scarborough, which actually had a brick wall built in front of this entrance. In fact, there was one at Reeton, which had a hole cut through the back wall. So they were clearly aware of this as a limitation of this design, but it's very, very unclear whether this was deliberate or whether it was just a mistake. And it was a matter of the pillbox design meant to have been in place within a trench system or something like that. We simply don't know at the time being, but that's something I want to get to the bottom of. We'll have a look at some other things as we go along. Again, massive, horrible, really nasty concrete that I really don't like. But what we see as we go along is this cliff that we're looking at on the right-hand side here, or my right, has eroded a significant degree. So originally, this anti-tank wall and the defences were pretty much built butting up against the base of that cliff. So over the past 80 years, or 80 or so years, we've lost easily about 15 metres of this coastline in that time, which isn't a lot for this stretch of coast. Some places we get 1 metre or 2 metres a year, but it does give us a good indication of how far things have eroded over the last 80 years. So we can actually use Second World War defences as a kind of proxy to measure and understand coastal erosion in a given area, which is a really cool thing. So I mentioned a minute ago, we have these wooden pegs which are likely to survive from when the anti-tank wall was plotted out on the ground, and that's one of them there. So a simple wooden peg stuck in the ground, and they cast the anti-tank wall around it. This is something we see massively on this stretch of coast. You know, you've got another one just in there, and once you get your eye in with these things, you'll be seeing them all over the place. Again, more really horrible anti-tank blocks or anti-tank cubes. These examples are almost at their original height, so it gives you a kind of idea of how tall these things are. Quick thing to mention about these, the ones you find in Yorkshire are actually bigger than the standardised design. So the standardised design had dimensions of about 1.2 metres square. The ones we get in Yorkshire are much bigger, so anything from 1.6 metres up to 1.9 metres, even 2 metres, with additional examples which are even 2 metres tall as well, and 2 metres square. So that's something to point out. We do things bigger and better in Yorkshire. And that brings us to this rather interesting structure here. So it might look like a pillbox. Yeah, and I can see why people would think this is a pillbox, but it's actually not. This is what was called a beach defence light. So this was a specially designed concrete structure with this originally a wide open embrasure which faces, in this case, north. And this is something we find a fair bit on the Yorkshire coast and elsewhere. Is this structure which was designed, or was intended to be used to, so there would have been a big light, a searchlight in there, which would have been occupied. There'd been a generator in the superstructure to the rear, and this would have been used to illuminate and sweep the beach in the event of an invasion at night. In practice, this was a really, really nice idea. You know, you want to be able to see what you want to shoot at on the beach if it lands at night. In reality, it was a really bad idea. As soon as this thing opened up with this massive light, the first thing that enemy troops landing on the beach would do is shoot at the position and make the soldiers inside not very happy. And then you also have the additional issue as well of any supporting ships out to sea being able to use that as a nice marker to pour fire onto. So very, very quickly what we see with these is that the embrasure, the really wide, nice, inviting embrasure, was filled up with concrete. and the position potentially turned into a light machine gun post. There was one example which we see, there was photographed just to the north end of Bridlington, which was taken in July 1940. And by that time, within a couple of months of the construction, the embrasure was already filled up by that point then. If we come around the back, again, you can see, it's nice, it's kind of like an almost First World War searchlight Caponia on there. And you see very similar positions built as part of our artillery batteries during the First World War. So it's a really, really, really nice design. It's just not very good. And then coming around to the rear, you've got some of the rebar sticking out there. And the original entrance has actually been filled up on this example as well. So that's actually looking like a Second World War concrete mix. So it's probably infilled shortly after construction, even though it was converted to a light machine gun post. And we've also got the blast wall, which has since detached from this from the rear here. And this would have just been a big thick wall to protect the entrance to the beach defence lighting placement as well, and offer a bit more protection to this open entrance and to the troops inside who were likely to get shot at a lot when they operated the light. All right, there's a couple of other really cool things down here as well, if we keep on going. So believe it or not, the east coast of the country was fortified extensively during the First World War as well. So the first time we pretty much see pillboxes built on the east coast and elsewhere is during the First World War. A lot of people simply don't know this, and a lot of people assume that the Navy were protecting the coast during the First World War. There was a massive amount of invasion threats during the First World War. Pretty much as soon as war was declared, there was a fear that the Germans would just arrive in London and invade. A lot of these invasion threats kind of coincided with movements on the Western Front as well. So there was several times where the Germans made a breakthrough, and there was a fear that they would keep on going and try and invade. So throughout the First World War, the East Coast was vulnerable from ports in Belgium and even northern Germany as well. And as a result, extensive anti-invasion defences were built along the East Coast, all the way from Kent, all the way as far north as Scotland. And these are now forgotten. Everyone thinks anti-invasion defence of the Second World War. Not the case. Let's just take a quick look at this one. So there are a couple of good indicators that indicate to us that this is different from the Second World War pillboxes. The main thing is this wall thickness. So that's a wall thickness of about 15 centimetres. During the Second World War, there were two standardised pillbox wall thicknesses which were issued by the War Department to ensure that the pillbox itself was proof against incoming projectiles of different calibers. These were bulletproof, so a wall thickness of reinforced concrete, which is 38 centimetres thick, was bulletproof, and then 1 metre 6 centimetres, obviously these aren't imperial measurements, was shellproof. 15 centimetres is not very thick and doesn't fit to those two specifications. So this wall, to Second World War standards, would have been way, way too thin. And it's quite unlikely this would have actually stood up to any sustained or prolonged fire. So that gives us a good indication this is earlier. We also have as well, these things plotted on aerial photographs taken in the interwar period, which gives us a good idea that these things are much earlier. There are several of these along the East Coast. The vast majority of them are now laying on the beach like this, but there are a couple of examples which are listed, which surround Auburn Farm. You've got a really nice cluster of First World War pillboxes just down there, which I recommend coming and have a visit for yourself. But yeah, due to coastal erosion and movement, this example here, sometimes it's fully exposed, sometimes it's completely buried. When we surveyed it a couple of years back, just the side walls here were surviving up to about a height of that. You've got just about one embrasure surviving there. So these were a simple square pillbox. So these things were constructed with a lattice work of rebar, which was pretty much like diamond shaped. It's really weird. It's like a lattice which creates these diamond shapes. And this is a really nice indicator of a First World War pillbox. And again, this is something to definitely come and visit this site to have a look at more. Like I say, if you head down to Auburn Sands, you'll see some amazing First World War pillboxes alongside the much later Second World War stuff as well. So let's have a look at something that we came back today and discovered and learned about quite by surprise recently. So over the last couple of years with working with CITiZAN, we've been out to the stretch of coast for the last, 6, 7, 8 years or something like that. And over time, we spotted this lump of concrete here. What's really cool about this one is when we first saw it, all that was surviving or all that was visible on the ground was pretty much about a section about that, give or take. And now we've come back today and this thing has appeared even more complete on the beach. So originally, when I looked at this, I thought this might be a First World War pillbox. So what we have is this, the flat-sided embrasure. A lot of this has disappeared now. And the wall thicknesses are really, really, really thick, which wouldn't indicate a Second World War pillbox. So we thought it was a new pillbox design that had not been discovered. And we gave it the rather snappy name of the Sherman Clement Colonco Mason pillbox or something really catchy like that. We've come back on site today and I've started looking at this now and we can see this made from this really horrible 1940s concrete. So I'm fairly certain this is one of these machine gun pillboxes, which is in just such a knackered state that it's really been very hard to identify. But there was a couple of really odd things with this one. The main one being that there's no rebar in this. We've got literally not a single sign of rebar, which is usually indicated by a nice brown staining, which leaches through the concrete itself and indicates that there is reinforcement within the structure. Very little evidence of that. If we come round the back and look at what I think was is the roof slab, we have got some of this staining coming through, but it's a really, really nasty concrete mix, which indicates it's possibly that 1940s concrete. So coming back here today, seeing a bit more of this pillbox makes me reconsider the original interpretation and makes me wonder if this is one of these Second World War machine gun pillboxes. So this is something we can look at in further detail when we can get the 1940s aerial photographs and try and plot the location of this and see how that matches up with what we see on the aerial photographs. And maybe we'll not have found a new type of First World War pillbox. Right, thank you very much for joining us here at Auburn Sands. We've been Team North, I've been Chris, and we hope to see you again on this lovely stretch of coast very soon.
Okay, so thank you for that, Chris. I hope you all enjoyed that. That one was edited by me. I hope you can all hear me. I hope this is coming through nice and clear. And we will just a reminder that you can keep putting those questions in, and I'm just about to transfer over to, hopefully, live Mr. Colonco and me. Again, if the audio isn't working, please just put it in the comments and I will pick up on it quickly and fix it. Thank you. All right, Chris, you're on. So, I have questions. First off, whilst we're waiting for these guys to populate the chat. Who was responsible for defending this stretch of coastline?
So this particular stretch of coast was defended by
several regular army battalions. So as of April 1941, we had the 8th Battalion of the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. They were supported by the 11th Battalion of the York and Lancaster Regiment, who were set to the rear. But over the course of from June 1940 onwards, there were several battalions, including the 1st Royal Berkshire Regiment, the 6th King's Own Royal Regiment. There was a whole range of regular army units that were responsible for defending this forward edge of the coast.
Okay, and now we have another question from me. Whilst there is questions in there, but I just want to get my ones in first.
I like that, yeah.
In a very selfish way. So, we have, what is the effect on the site of climate change? I can see everything's falling down the cliffs, but what is the future for that site?
Well, especially over the, since I've been involved with CITiZAN, the pillbox that we looked at, trying to remember the video now, second, where I go into a bit more detail, that has shifted significantly over the space of, 6-7 years, give or take, and that kind of erosion of the boulder clay cliff in that area has certainly increased over the course of the last decade or so. So I think obviously we can say in the future that through climate change and increased tidal scour and increased storm events, this stretch of coast is going to get further battered. And like I say, it's definitely within the last decade that we've seen, especially this stretch of coast, see particularly increased coastal erosion going on and shifting sands and tidal scour, which obviously is going to have effects on these sites in the future, which is why it's really important to to record them archaeologically now. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and on that line as well, we can also use resources like the RAF aerial photographs taken of the coast to plan the defences. We can build up a good idea within a couple of days of or within the space of a couple of weeks of when these things were constructed. So, like I say, they're a really nice baseline and datum point for analysing and assessing coastal erosion over the last 80 years.
So we have a question straight from Andy. Not Andy. Which is, why do some of the anti-tank cubes seem to be eroding faster than others?
That's a good question. So Andy will know, as he was the chap filming this,
the answer to this question didn't quite make it into the video because we messed up the audio. So what we see on this site is that, how to explain this without going off on a tangent and talking about concrete for an hour. We see two distinct construction phases within the defences here. And this earlier phase is represented, you'll have heard me say in the video, this nasty 1940s concrete, which I was referring to the concrete that was put down in July 1940, which is this really nasty, horrible, sandy mix of concrete, which has got an abundance of sand in it to essentially pad it out, we think, and make it go a bit further. And as a result, the earlier, like the first phase of defence construction, the anti-tank cubes in particular are eroding massively heavily because they're constructed from this really, really shoddy concrete. We know from the documentary record that there was a second phase of construction underway in March 1941, and this used a much more consistent concrete mix, which today survives really, really nicely in the landscape. So the early defences built in June, July 1940 are made from a really nasty, horrible concrete, which we're trying to work out the reasons why that was done, whether it was inexperience of the contractors who were constructing the defence under the supervision of the Royal Engineers, or whether it was the fact that they start to run out of cement or aggregate and had an abundance of sand which they had to use to pad out the resources they had. We haven't got a definitive answer on that just yet, but it's something we're going to look into. But yeah, this is why we see some things surviving really nicely and other things surviving in a terrible, terrible state, due to the concrete that was used. And hopefully this is something we'll get to investigate further in the next couple of months and start to look into in a bit more detail.
Oh, sorry. Brilliant. Sorry, I found out what the issue was. We had a last-minute mic change, guys, and now I'm working off of the laptop mic, which means you might hear an echo every so often, which is me turning on and off the laptop mic. So I apologise for that. We'll try and slow down a little bit so that it comes through a bit clearer. So we have a one from, again, Andy, because he loves firing questions at us. He just loves concrete. Okay, what would it have been like inside a pillbox when firing? Did they fill up with smoke quickly?
It'd have been very noisy. So obviously when you're firing, any small arm like a rifle all the way up to a medium machine gun inside, confined concrete space, it would be extremely loud. When you see, footage and photos of, the soldiers in there, you never see like any ear protection or anything like that, but you'd have been deaf within a couple of minutes. And it's something I would really like to test out in the future, is work out, get some not live firing, but get some firing, blank firing going on inside one of these structures and recording the using a decibel meter how loud it would have been, because we simply don't know. But my assessment would be it'd be extremely loud. In terms of smoke, Cordite's a smokeless powder or propellant, so it doesn't generate masses of smoke like black powder does, but it would still create a significant amount of fumes within the pillbox, and it wouldn't necessarily obscure the stop the crew from operating within the pillbox. And when we looked at the Vickers machine gun pillboxes, they've got these nice wide embrasures and large entrances which would have allowed steady flow of air. And we also have vents in the roof as well, so this clearly was a consideration to ensure that the pillbox was properly ventilated. From documents that Richard Fisher from the, I'm going to butcher this as I always do, the Vickers Machine Gun Collection and Research Association, I might have got that right this time. He found some documents which were drawn up in, I think, 1940 or 41, which did highlight concerns over carbon monoxide within pillboxes from the firing of machine guns. So they were clearly aware of these issues and tried to find ways of mitigating it. But I think you'd be pretty uncomfortable in there, operating a machine gun. But if you're, it's the opposite is you're outside getting shot at in the open, and I think people inside would probably get used to the situation quite easily and would adapt and react. But it's something that I'd really like to look at in the future, try and work this out and get an idea of what it would have been like, from a modern perspective.
Yeah, I won't be volunteering for when you want to test that, I'll be honest.
Oh, that's a shame. I was going to get you to do it.
Okay, so on to the next question. From Brian Tompkinson. Brian Tompkinson. Apologies. I'm not a quick reader, Brian. I'm very hard. I found this out that I can't read chats very quickly when we're doing this stuff. So it is how many personnel in a Type 22 pillbox, Chris?
Oh, good question. So they were designed for something like 6 or 7 soldiers, something like that on paper. But when you look at, especially an FW322, it's really, really tiny. And I'd be really surprised if you could fit 6 people in, let alone allow them to operate effectively. So I'd say, in practice, you'd probably get no more than a brain gun section and a section second in command. So that'd be your brain gunner, your brain second gunner / assistant, and probably the section second in command. So 3 soldiers would be probably able to operate in the really confined space relatively effectively. But what we see on a lot of Second World War sites, especially like the ones I've been looking at in Filey, is that the majority of the soldiers would be in positions outside the pillbox itself, so operating it from within slit trenches and the like, because it gives you a better field of view over the landscape and gives you better situational awareness. And then you would generally deploy your brain gun section within the pillbox itself, which would have afforded them a lot better protection, a stable platform to fire from. On paper 6 or 7, but in practice it probably varied massively how many people would have actually been inside, and I'm fairly certain that it'd be relatively few.
Okay, thanks for that. Sorry for me staring at the bottom, Chris. I'm trying to balance these 2 microphones and audio signals.
That's all right.
Okay, so are any of the pillboxes at Auburn Sands protected by Historic England?
No, because no one's bothered to submit them. So no, I'm going to get on with something for that though, because the one that we looked at the first with the anti-tank cubes is certainly of local significance, if not national, there's a really decent representation of the Yorkshire coastal crust, which generally doesn't survive on much of the East Yorkshire coast. But yeah, key problem with listing and protection of pillboxes is that very few people actually bother to even submit an application for listing, other than it's from World War II and it's important, which doesn't get anything listed. And there's a lot of people that don't bother to even interact with local heritage organisations like the Historic Environment Record or planning authorities to speak up for and advocate for Second World War stuff, which is a great shame really, and is one of the reasons why very few things are actually protected in any official capacity.
Okay, and then just to draw us back into the anti-tank cubes, so there is a slight lag on the live stream to YouTube. But so Brian Tomskin he wants you to kind of talk more on the poor durability of anti-tank blocks due to the use of beach sand and seawater. So is that kind of the makeup, I imagine?
Well, this is the thing. They won't have been using beach sand or seawater to make these things. You can't, because you'd need to desalinate this stuff. The accounts I've seen is that they were getting sand from elsewhere, so you wouldn't use seawater either. There are accounts that they would have to fill up water butts and water carriages with fresh water from streams, for example. So you wouldn't be using salt water or sand in the construction of these things. But yeah, it's interesting to think about the effect that what we see at Auburn in the use of padding out the concrete with too much sand, in that it would have affected the effectiveness of the anti-tank blocks themselves. So generally, what we see from tests done in August 1940 is that a standard anti-tank block could withstand about something like 25 to 30 strikes from 2-pounder ammunition fired from a tank, which is pretty good when you consider that a tank would probably carry about probably about that ammunition. So it's a pretty good effectiveness to put up against that kind of fire and still offer a relatively decent obstacle. And when you consider that was the amount of ammunition needed to destroy a single cube, it really gets you thinking. But yeah, I do think that the early defences would have been, or the early anti-tank blocks would have been somewhat compromised by the use of a really poor concrete mix. And we also see that going into the anti-tank wall as well. This really nasty mix. And one thing that I would like to do is try and assess that, see if there's a way of assessing whether the June-July 1940 anti-tank cubes would have been compromised in any way due to this poor concrete mix. And actually, that's something I'm going to add to my list of research questions.
The massive list of research questions. I think we've all.
Yeah, which keeps on growing.
Okay, I have a question from myself. I'm just going. There is one from Caroline, but we'll just ignore that for a second. So my one is the bigger and better Yorkshire cubes. I remember, because I edited the video, so I remember the other tangents within that one. Some people love the tangents, by the way. Some people want a full 4 hours of concrete tangents. But why? Why did they make them bigger in Yorkshire? Is there a reason?
I really don't know the answer to that. It's quite specific to Northern Command, and it does make me wonder if they didn't think the standardised designs were good enough, for the needs of the local command. So they increased the dimensions to something that they thought would be appropriate to, stop an enemy vehicle or tanks, which is one possibility. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, because what we see quite clearly especially within 218 Brigade, of Northern Command, is that they're using their own designs of, localised designs of pillboxes drawn up at a brigade level, which does suggest to me that they were doing things their own way. And that's something actually we see within the wider Northern Command within Yorkshire, is that, the general strategy of stop lines, which was implemented by General Ironside, from June to August 1940, is pretty much ignored in Yorkshire. And 218 Brigade, or, prior to that, I can't remember, 6th Division, something like that, went around things their own way and never built the GHQ line, focused on nodal point defence, which came in once Ironside was replaced in July 1940, and took over from the stop line strategy from August 1940 onwards, and focused on demolition belts, which were like rigging river crossings and bridges to be blown up in front of an advancing enemy. So I just get the impression that it was just the local officers responsible, and the local brigade and the local organisation who were responsible for adapted the official plans and implemented the strategy as they saw fit, to adhere to local defence needs. I think that's the simplest answer, and I can't think of any other one other than they just liked big cubes. I don't know.
It's just like bigger and better things. So you'll be glad to know we've stuck out a quick poll, and 100% of people came back with, do they think pillboxes should be protected? Emma Grimes says get them listed. And then I suppose we should probably get back to the question from the big boss, Caroline, coming in. Caroline Barry Smith is our project manager, and you would have seen her in the previous site tour. what does the future of this what does the future hold for this site? Sorry.
Good question. Obviously, we still know relatively little about it. You know, we're only scratching the surface when we start to look at this site. But one thing that is vitally important, especially in this area, is to put the Auburn sands into its wider context. So do more research, trying to understand the wider defences inland, how they would have operated, the units and the people responsible for defence of this area, and also as well better understanding the original extent of these defences as well. So that's quite easy to build up using aerial photographs. And one thing it'd be really nice to do is get all the aerial photographs and kind of plot the development of these defences so we better understand how the situation changed over a set amount of time. But yeah, a key thing from my perspective is the future of the site lies in more documentary research to build up this picture, because the concrete gives us just one kind of a very small view of what was actually going on, and we don't see the intangible stuff which didn't leave a mark on the landscape, like how an infantry battalion defending the stretch of coast was to move through the landscape, how the defence was organised in depth, and what was going on further inland. In terms of preservation, obviously with this being a coastal site, there's very little you can do to preserve this stuff. It'll eventually, end up in the sea. But where possible, well, obviously the key thing here is to ensure preservation by record through recording this stuff, and this is the only way a lot of Second World War coastal sites are going to be preserved, is it within the record by creating a detailed written record of the site, photographic record, and obviously the documentary research to support that, to ensure that future generations have a better understanding of this period than we currently do at the minute.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's that thing, it comes back to that thing we all covered in the concrete conundrum, how people always think World War II is so well understood and we just don't.
Yeah, it really isn't. These things are, we know very little about these, even after like 30, 40 years of investigation. We know what's going on, I say this all the time, on a national scale, but when you start getting down to your county level and sub-county level, we know next to nothing, and it's pretty ridiculous, really.
Okay, so that seems like a nice place to end on, because we haven't got many other questions coming in, Chris. We've put out resources in that, so I think what we're gonna do, Chris, because we are having audio issues where we can't talk over each other. If we say goodbye for you for now, thank you so much, and I will switch over to just me personally, and I will do the wrap up, and then we will finish the